Happy National Dog Bite Awareness Week. This is the focus group.
They're all business, except when they're not. It's the focus group with Tim Bennett and John Nash.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the focus group. Tim Bennett here, as always, with my good friend and co-host, Mr. John T. Nash, in the beautiful city of New York City. John, before I go into everything, I saw a picture over the weekend of New York, and it looked like it was bustling with people. So is it back? New York City back?
It's a great question. Yes, it is sort of. And what I mean by that is lots of tourists, lots of people visiting the city, but the areas that are intensely business, I would say that they still have a lot of empty storefronts, only 60% occupancy. Like, not everybody's coming back to the office, and that's going to be a big thing. But it does feel way better to see all these people, and the trains are more crowded.
I was surprised when I saw it. And then I did get some promotions from Amtrak about some new service finally, and more reliable, I guess, service on an hourly basis to Manhattan. So, and
I love that notion that they're talking about more reliable service. You and I always love the train, but let's be real.
Well, during the pandemic, they collapsed, like airlines used to do when they didn't have full loads. So if 3 airlines, all within 5 minutes, were going to the same location. When I lived in Minnesota, I took a flight every Monday morning to Chicago, an 8 a.m. flight. And it was Northwest, American, and Delta, and United would fly there. But each plane had about 10 people. So it depending upon the week where they would say you were going to go to, they all did the share. So they only flew one plane down instead of 4 planes that just, with 10 people in them. I used to fly 747 all the time. I loved it. Northwest did from Minneapolis to Chicago, and then it went off to Narita. But 60 flight attendants. There was like 7 of us on the plane. It was fantastic. But
each flight attendant could come by, here's your bag of nuts. Yeah. The next one comes by and says, here's your drink. The next one comes by and says, here's a napkin.
Yeah. So, hey, how our show works, this is our Wednesday show, the focus group with Tim Bennett and John Nash. We're in our 15th year. So think about that. Some people that are podcasting weren't even born yet. Anyway, we've been here for quite some time, and we appreciate those of you who have been with us. Plus, we do appreciate our partners, particularly Deep Discount, who's with us here. We'll talk about Deep Discount a little later in the broadcast. For those of you new to our programming, we do a Caught My Eye, which are 2 news stories John and I share. We talk, as I said, about one of our sponsors, Deep Discount, and do some movie selections. We also have a business birthday. And then this week in particular, we have a segment we're calling A Road to Pride. John and I, in full transparency, have been doing some work with Procter & Gamble. And we've got to meet some of the nonprofits, LGBTQ nonprofits they've worked with. And so today we're going to speak with Dr. David Johns, who's with the National Black Justice Coalition out of Washington, D.C. So that'll be later in the show. And learn all about us at focusgroupradio.com.
I also want to do a quick programming note that next week we have joining us Ben Model. Ben Model. Did I get that right?
No, it's Modell, like Modell Sports.
I always do that. Ben Modell, he's from Undercrank Productions, and he's going to give us a kind of a 101 on silent film. And he's the guy to do it. I love listening to him, and he's going to give you a couple of films you might want to watch. If you're a movie buff, you really do need to know silent films, because right before, Tim, why are you?
Did I ever tell you the silent film story with me in Washington State? Oh, my God. It's too long for today.
Okay.
But, remind me sometime. Maybe we'll do it after the segment next week.
Agreed.
We'll talk about it, because you'll get a kick out of it. So, hey, without further... So that's next week. We've got Ben Modell to talk about silent films and why they're a cool genre for us to pay attention to. Mr. Nash, what caught your eye this week?
What caught your eye? Here's what Tim and John found.
You might have seen this as well. Basically, here's the headline: Bibles banned from Utah schools. So
I did see this, and I laughed and I laughed.
Yeah, I did too. And I think the article's super short. So basically, in 2022, Utah passed a law banning books with pornographic or indecent content, and it was so loosely defined and vaguely defined, and it ended up restricting access to many titles that contained age-appropriate themes, for example, characters, gender, sexuality, and race. What a surprise. This is Protect the Kids. Young adult fiction authors, including Judy Blume, Maya Kobabe, and Sarah J. Maas, were among those restricted from school libraries at the Alpine School District in Utah, the state's largest. In March, a parent wrote to the district, Davis School District, demanding that the Bible should be taken off shelves based on the new law. And he says this: incest, onanism, bestiality, prostitution, genital mutilation, fellatio, dildos, rape, and even infanticide. He wrote accurately and non-exhaustively. Accurate. This is the Bible, right? Yeah. Get this porn, all caps, out of our schools. If the books that have been banned so far are any indication for way lesser offenses, the Bible should be a slam dunk. Interestingly, the district appointed a committee to review that parent's complaint and determined that while the Bible can stay on high school shelves, it needed to be removed from younger grades. Davis School District spokesperson Christopher Williams told the Salt Lake Tribune that Bibles would be removed from 7 or 8 school libraries in the district effective immediately. And then, here's the next ripple. According to the Tribune, another parent has already appealed that parent's demand, so the district will need to form a new committee consisting of 3 members of Davis School District's Board of Education, which will make a recommendation and send the decision to the board for a vote. But for now, the Bible is off for certain kids. And I'll say this, the good book, I'm not knocking the Bible. A lot of people love it, swear by it. We all know it's almost like a historical document. It's a lot of things have been put in it. But if you are going to say that we are a country that respects the separation of church and state, then the Bible to some of us is simply a book. And that book has things that you might say are questionable based on the law that Utah passed. So I think it's perfectly valid, right?
It's stories. There were no kids in any of our libraries that ran for the Bible. Nobody ran to get the Bible, did they? So you check out the Bible. And I laughed because when you gave the list of stories that are included within the Bible, very different than Johnny's got 2 mommies.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
So I find, hey, listen, this is the slippery slope. That there was one of these legislatures were doing the same sort of thing, or they're banning. It was in Missouri. They were banning discussion of marriages. You weren't allowed to talk about marriage as it pertained to same-sex marriage, I guess. And then they decided that it was marriages in general. So this one legislature says to this woman who was proposing this, his parents said, "Who's George Washington?" And his father of the country, first president. Did he have a wife? Yes, Martha Washington. We can't talk about it.
Seriously?
Yeah. She goes, well, that's not it. He goes, no. We're not allowed to talk about it. Not allowed to talk about relationships. Not allowed to talk about spouses. And she was so mad. She was so flustered and flummoxed. She didn't know what to do. And he said, this is essentially what you've said. This is what you want. We're not allowed to talk about anything. So, and she was like, yeah, you're twisting it. He goes, I'm not twisting anything. You don't want to discuss relationships. You don't want to discuss marriage. And so we can't discuss Martha Washington in class. And
you're right. So, unintended consequences, and it's so transparent what they're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's veiled against this protecting children, etc. I mean, what was it recently? Was it in Baltimore, Maryland? The archdiocese, the Catholic archdiocese. I don't know how many priests were involved in something that went back 40 years. Yeah,
we'll pick a state. It was Illinois, I think, but Maryland just had one recently. There's not a city within the country that hasn't had a Roman Catholic Church scandal.
And that's the same as someone reading books to kids dressed as a drag queen. I've never seen like a headline that's equivalent to what I've seen with some of these priest things. It's so selective and hypocritical. Anyway, that was
someone had put something. They said they used Fox News as the example. They said they've spent 2 hours and 12 minutes discussing the Target boycott with clothing, and spent less than 20 seconds on the Catholic priest debacle in Illinois.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, we know what the mission is.
We do.
We've seen it before.
So what caught your eye?
So you
teased it, right?
I teased it with National Bite Dog Awareness Week, which started June 4th, John. So if you'd like to celebrate, I mean, who knew that there was a National Dog Bite Awareness Week? I thought maybe the last week in March, John, we'll do Focus Group Awareness Week. Maybe that'll be next.
That's
The
not a
last
bad
week in
idea. I
March
like
will be
that.
known as
Yeah.
Focus Group Awareness Week.
I like that one.
But this is from the US Postal Service. And so in 2020, so every year they put together this list. They apparently train their letter carriers on how to handle dogs and how to handle animals in people's yards that may be off leash or behind a fence or at a door. So there's a whole list of things. Do not startle the dog. Keep their eyes on any dog. So if you see a dog, keep your eyes on them. Don't assume the dog will not bite. Make some noise or rattle a fence to alert the dog you're coming into the yard. Don't attempt to pet or feed the dog. Place your foot against an outward swinging door to prevent him from escaping. And if attacked, you're told to stand your ground. So
wow. That last one.
now
Stand
I
your
laugh
ground.
because when I lived in Pennsylvania, and Spike and Trixie would be in the yard, and they hated the mailman, no matter who it was. They hated the mailman. Rex, on the other hand, next door was smart. He knew every day he'd sit and wait very patiently at the fence and always got a dog bone.
Did he really?
They tried, the mailman, men and women would try to give something to Spike and Trixie, nothing doing. They wanted nothing to do with it. They were standing their ground in the yard, but Rex
Rex was a German Shepherd, right?
and he was smart enough to know he was getting a
Yeah.
treat, and he knew the time
He
was going to
puzzled it,
happen.
Yeah.
So they compile this list. They said last year in 2022 there were 5,300 letter carriers that were bit by dogs across the country, which I thought was quite high. Do you want to take a guess at what city had the most dog bites?
I am going to say Detroit.
No, Detroit was a good guess. So Detroit was somewhere in the middle. The city with the most dog bites was Houston.
Houston.
They had 57 letter carriers got bit in Houston. So the top 5 were Houston, Los Angeles with 48, Dallas with 44, Cleveland with 43, and San Diego with 39.
So my guess was really way off base.
It wasn't off base. It was right around the same area where Philadelphia was. So Philadelphia and Detroit were in, I believe it was the 30 range. Yeah, here it is. Detroit had 30 dog bites and Philadelphia had 28. And but they list all the cities. The city with the least amount of the big cities was Baltimore. In terms of dog bites. In terms of states, do you want to guess what state had the most dog bites?
If I did so poorly, if I nailed the middle
You
one.
weren't poor. You weren't poor. It wasn't a poor
Well,
guess.
if Houston, can we assume that maybe it's Texas?
Texas was number 2.
Okay.
But,
Who's number 1?
But that's a good guess. California is probably by sheer population, right?
Okay.
So California had the most dog bites with 675, followed by Texas with 404. New York State, now interestingly, no New York City. So New York City or none of the large metropolitan areas of the state of New York ranked in the top cities with dog bites. So that was interesting. But the state of New York came in number 3 at 321, followed by Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Florida, Michigan, Missouri, and North Carolina. So those were the 10 states that had the most dog bites for letter carriers.
They make a lot of sense, don't you think, the list in some ways when you think about it?
Yeah, and a lot of them would be rural. So if there were rural areas, and so if you're in neighborhood delivery of stuff, because I looked at the list when I looked at it initially when it said the rankings by cities, I looked for New York City, but I'm thinking who has a loose dog in New York City that a letter carrier would.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
so-
They're dropping off at like building lobbies and
Right.
stuff. They're not going to a fenced-in home or something. Yeah.
So be sure to celebrate Dog Bite Awareness Week. It's taking place right now and runs through June 10th, Saturday. June
And
10th.
celebrate Rex, who was smart enough to figure out that if he was a good dog, he got a bone.
Very smart dog, Rex was. So hey, many of you know that Deep Discounts, friends of ours here on the Focus Group, and you can get there by going to focusgroupradio.com. Right now, they're having a huge site-wide summer sale, which means everything on the site's for sale. Not only movies and DVDs and discs, but also other types of products that are there that you can search around and look for. Mr. Nash, what did you find this week?
I picked a movie that I want to talk about briefly. So I was reading QueerTea the other day, queertea.com,
Yep.
a blog. And they did a review. This guy said, I don't know why this particular movie is not a gay classic. And it's called Something for Everyone. And it stars Michael York and Angela Lansbury. And she plays a countess who lives in an old rundown castle, and she's regretting the fact that the family's lost their money or they're not anywhere near the status they used to have. And Michael York plays a kind of every man, he can do it all. He wants to get ahead. He befriends everybody, and he basically sleeps with everybody to try to get himself to be in that castle with Angela Lansbury, at least to be the man of the house or something. And he sleeps with the gardener. Like, so there's gay things in there. There's straight. It's kind of crazy. And Queerty put it this way. The film was helmed by legendary Broadway director and producer Hal Prince,
Oh, wow.
who counts as his credits West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof, Cabaret, Sweeney Todd, and Phantom of the Opera. Okay. And it's the only movie he ever directed apart from the adaptation of Sondheim's A Little Night Music. The screenplay was written by Hugh Wheeler, who also wrote the books for A Little Night Music, Sweeney Todd, and Candide. And it's just sounds like a movie I need to see. And it's called Something for Everyone. It's $16.41 on DVD, available at deep discount, and it's got Angela Lansbury. I've never heard of it, so this is one of those explore, find something you want, and check it out.
So it came out in 1970. I'm surprised.
Yes.
I'm surprised we haven't heard of it. It sounds interesting. So yeah, that's a good one. That's a good pick. I like when you find stuff like that because you're not going to find it anywhere else.
Exactly.
So I had picked something else. I know a lot of people talk about streaming or whatever, but you're not going to find this either, or at least I've never seen it run anywhere. But it's Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, the complete series.
This was guilty pleasure if you were allowed to stay up, right?
Well, I was going to say, my parents would laugh and laugh and laugh and watch it. I would try to listen. I'd be in my bedroom. I would try to, got to go to bed. I think it was probably on, 9 or 10 o'clock when we were little.
Yep.
And they would laugh. I never got the jokes. You often mention that thing that, we might think it was funny in an outfit somebody was in, but, the humor back then, they did an awful lot with language, which was not, as you said, they didn't have to rely on swearing or some of the other things that they do now.
Like Johnny Carson, right?
Yeah, innuendo and smart banter. But Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, this is the complete series. It was released in 2021 on DVD, and by Time Life, there's 37 discs. And 37? Right. It stars Dan Rowan, Dick Martin, Ruth Buzzy, Gary Owens, Artie Johnson, Lily Tomlin, Joanne Worley, Goldie Hawn, folks like that from the 60s and 70s. They were, it's all 140 episodes of the series. It's complete. It's unedited. It's been restored and remastered. And there's many bonus features, they say. It was also, they said the important part about it was they tackled a lot of social and political issues of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, they did.
That weren't really done at the time. And the show also coined the expression "sock it to me."
I do remember that.
With Nixon. And they've had all kinds of guests: John Wayne, Johnny Carson, Jack Benny, Sammy Davis Jr., Richard Nixon was even on there, Phyllis Diller. So it's one of these, I would say, a time capsule of America. You can get it for over 50% off right now at deep discount during the site-wide sale for $77.97 for all 37 discs, which I think.
Tim, do you remember when they would open the show? Didn't the two of them come out smoking cigarettes?
They may have, and didn't one have an instrument maybe?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah,
he played like a little
cello.
ukulele or something.
Or was it a cello? I don't remember, but we weren't allowed to watch it. I guess it was, it was taboo, or as adult humor.
Yeah, totally adult.
That and hee haw, right? I guess Laugh-In, and then there was hee haw for the middle set.
And wasn't there Love American Style?
Oh my gosh, that was 10 o'clock at night.
Truer
I always
than
liked
the
the fireworks.
Blue.
That's what I got out of it, was the fireworks.
Love American Style. That's me and you. Yeah.
Not that when you see the opening of these things and they're running from bed to bed, jumping in bed to bed. As a little kid, I didn't pay attention to that, but I was those fireworks are pretty cool.
See how the humor is stratified? You got it, some of it as a kid.
Yeah. So what was the new release, Mr.
New release this week is a movie called Renfield. It came out to some fanfare because it stars Nicolas Cage. So the description is Nicholas Hoult stars as Renfield, the tortured aide to history's most narcissistic boss, Dracula, who is played by Nicolas Cage. For centuries, Renfield has slavishly served Dracula by procuring his master's prey and doing his every bidding, no matter how bad that is. So this came out. I remember the reviews were iffy, but it's a Nicolas Cage, and if you like his intense performances, then I think you'll pretty much enjoy Renfield. And on Blu-ray at the moment, it's $22.99. So if you missed it at the box office, it's Renfield. All right, folks, to recap our Deep Discount segment here, thank you to Deep Discount for joining us. Go to focusgroupradio.com, click on their logo, and start your shopping journey. I recommended a movie that Queer Tea had brought up that Tim and I never heard of, but it has Michael York and Angela Lansbury, and there's a lot of gay stuff going in there because he beds anybody to get to the top, and that includes the gardener and the chauffeur, perhaps. I might be stretching it a bit. Tim picked Rowan Martin's Laugh-In, the complete series. Tim, you said it was like 37 discs or something?
37 discs, all remastered and unedited with bonus.
So maybe as the adults that we are now, we can watch this when we were forbidden as children and smile at the charming humor from early 70s, right? And the new film this week, the new release, is Renfield. You can grab that at Deep Discount. So again, deepdiscount.com. You can access it by going to focusgroupradio.com, and thank you to them. And there you go. So, Mr. Bennett, what do we have coming up next? We have Dr. David Johns.
David Johns from the National Black Justice Coalition on our segment, The Road to Pride.
Okay, this was a segment we recorded a little bit earlier, so we're going to jump right in. As we head into Pride season, Tim and I here on the Focus Group would like to introduce you to a segment called The Road to Pride. Each week, we're going to introduce you to some organizations you probably already know and some that you should know. So buckle up, stay tuned, and it's time for The Road to Pride. Joining us now is Dr. David Johns. He's the Executive Director of NBJC, the National Black Justice Coalition. And before we welcome him, I just want to give you a little bit of his resume and background. Dr. Johns was appointed the first Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans by President Barack Obama and served in that role from 2013 to 2017. He was the Senior Education Policy Advisor of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions under the leadership of U.S. Senator Tom Harkin, and has served under the leadership of the late U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy. Dr. Johns was a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Fellow in the Office of Congressman Charles Rangel. Now, you have quite the resume, and I'm just going to say this. Give us a thumbnail or a quick sketch of NBJC for our audience.
Yeah, I should be able to do that. NBJC is the nation's oldest civil rights organization focused at the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQIA plus equality. We acknowledge that as long as there have been people, we've been beautifully and incredibly diverse, and celebrate the lesson of Fannie Lou Hamer, who taught us that none of us are free unless and until all of us are free. So we focus on public policy at every level, direct service provision, and working in partnership to increase opportunities and enhance life outcomes for Black, LGBTQIA plus, and same-gender loving people.
So David, with the thanks for joining us here today. With what's going on in the last few months with all the anti-LGBTQ legislation that seems to be popping up, and us having come out of COVID, how is that? Has that had to make you folks pivot into your mission, or how has that affected what you're doing in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I think it's important to provide everything in context. The short and direct answer to your question is that our work continues. We remain steadfast in the goals and priorities that we have identified quite some time ago. And celebrate seems like the wrong word given the trauma associated with a lot of the legislation that we've seen. But what we're seeing in terms of nearly 500 pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation introduced across more than 47 states across our great country is an indicator that there has been market progress made to increase outcomes for LGBTQIA plus people, Black people, and those of us who are Black and LGBTQIA plus. And so I'd like to share that the CDC recently published data that said that more public school students are identifying as LGBTQIA plus in relationship with young people in the work that we do. They often highlight for us that that doesn't mean that they're engaging in queer romantic relationships, but they are mindful that the boxes and binaries that exist are not designed to contain them and are used as tools to maintain supremacy. And so it's been really important for us to continue to do our work to respond to some of the attacks that we're seeing, but to not be swept up by the weapons of mass distraction or to be deterred or distracted from the work that we know is important to do.
David, do you think that your last answer and your last explanation was incredibly smart and very nuanced. And I put those two words together because I'm not sure that our current media landscape allows for detail or nuance. And I say to has this current like kind of brute force binary news cycles of on, off, plus, minus, bad, good made it more difficult for the mission?
Yes, what has made our work more difficult are at least three things. One is the lack of accountability provided by journalists, or what we used to call journalists, but people who operate in media spaces. The kind of fact checking, smart reporting, and holding individuals accountable for the things that they say and the actions that they take doesn't exist in the ways in which it should, especially as we think about the last occupant of the Oval Office or the governor of so many states throughout our country, including Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas. The second thing that is challenging for us is that the media continues to give platforms to people who are beyond problematic. In this moment, thinking about what's happening as we're having this conversation, I can't help but to name Caitlyn Jenner as someone who is problematic in the ways in which they leverage their privilege, but are also protected without regard for the things that they say. And so Caitlyn operating in very problematic ways makes it more difficult for us to do the work that is important for us to do to change the fact that the death rates for the murder rates for Black trans women is disproportionate every year. It has been the highest year recorded for the deaths of trans women every year since I have been in the position of quarterbacking the team at the National Black Justice Coalition. And then the third thing is that legislators, our legislators rather, are not held liable for the things that they say on the House floor. And so what we're experiencing is a lot of lying and a lot of gaslighting by elected officials who seem to not care about their children or their country at this point, in part because so many of them are engaging in strategies that are weakening democracy. But the ability for folks to lie without impunity is complicating our ability to have fact-based, compassionate, and competent conversations about the ways in which we've always taken up space and the need for us to shift policy to provide protections for those of us who are most marginalized.
With your legislative background and the work you've done with Senator Kennedy or Harkin and the Obama administration and Representative Rangel, are you lobbying Congress?
We don't
National
lobby.
Black
We're
Justice
a 501c. We're
Right,
a 501c3, so we do education and empowerment. We have a C4,
right.
but we don't lobby.
I was wondering because with your strong background and knowing how I think so much of what happens is how to navigate some of the halls of power. And I know in the state offices now everybody says we really need to get down to the grassroots and work within the state legislative branches because of what's happening there. Do you have hope for the future? I heard someone the other day say, it might have been Billy Porter, said that he felt things were going to get worse before they get better, but he was hopeful things would get better. Do you feel the same way?
I don't feel the same way, having heard you quote Billy. What I know is that the legacy of African descendants throughout the world is one of thriving in spite of the fact that there are so many young people who are critical thinking, who are woke in spite of insistences to the contrary, who are asking tough questions, who are making critical connections, and who are arguing in the face of educators who are attempting to indoctrinate them and prevent them from thinking critically or engaging in thoughtful discourse or debate, who are objecting to their parents' and grandparents' insistence on maintaining white supremacy, and continuing to see them shift and push and demand to strengthen democracy in ways that hold space for the diversity that exists not only throughout our country, but throughout the world, gives me hope. And to your previous observation around the importance of legislation, it gives me hope that NBJC has established a good trouble network, a network of Black LGBTQIA+ elected officials. We have one openly gay member of Congress, Richie Torres. The vast majority of our members are at the municipal level. which is important, especially now, not only because elections happen every year and elections and politics are local, but because so many of the fights, the attacks on children and schools and democracy are happening at the local level, where school board members are the police chief or the sheriff are the people who have all of the power. And so I celebrate the hope that they give me every single day, and also celebrate that NBJC has been able to find ways to fill gaps, to provide people with tools so that they can dream a world that is not tarnished by white supremacy and its cousins, anti-LGBTQ or anti-LGBTQ bias, stigma, and discrimination. And so our ability to hear the fact that our babies are ringing the alarm. The suicide rate for Black youth have doubled over the last 2 decades. And what we know is that the suicide rates and the mental health challenges that students who have compounded intersectional identities because they are Black and members of sexual minority communities, or also maybe have a disability, or the parents are not native to this country, their mental health rates are significantly worse. The Trevor Project recently published a report in February that said 1 in every 4 Black, trans, or non-conforming or non-binary young people have experienced suicidal ideation in the last year. And what I know as a researcher is that number is most likely an undercount, in part because of the way that we collect data and justifiable mistrust that Black people have with regard to institutions who collect data, often to weaponize it against us. For folks who have no idea what I'm talking about, I will point you to what's happening in Uganda in this moment as an example of how this is all playing out today. But all of this is a really long way of saying, yes, what I know is that we will win. We will win in spite of these attempts. What I know is that the current actions by elected leaders, and some of them weren't even elected, they appointed themselves, is a reflection of the fact that they know that we are winning. And in spite of efforts to legislate genocide, which is the result of saying that people can't use names that affirm their experiences, can't access healthcare, make decisions with a doctor that takes a Hippocratic oath because elected leaders who know nothing about biology or medicine or science or care about people or country are attempting to prevent that. In spite of all of those things and those attempts, what I know is that we have always existed. We have always lived on the front lines to earn rights that other people take for granted. And there is nothing rather that will stop us from continuing to do the work so that we can all be free.
David, that whole section just kind of blows my mind. And I have a thought, one of many thoughts that comes to the forefront is, given that tapestry that you just laid out of all the challenges, also the hope, what is the one resource that you would love to have more of at NBJC, that if someone's listening right now, I imagine it might be financial to really help these programs and these things along, but is it boots on the ground? Is it a check in the mail? What is the thing that you could really use the best as a tool?
Yeah, my body is responding, having a visceral response to that. And here's what I thought about what's coming to mind. When I worked in the White House, it was really important to me to be disruptive. I had a number of interviews, and one of my last interviews was with Secretary Arne Duncan, who said that you have an opportunity and really an obligation to be disruptive. And I said to him, that's easy for you to say, Mr. White Man Secretary, but I took it to heart. And I made it a point that if anybody in the White House and that administration were talking about students had to be present. They had to be present for 2 reasons at a minimum. One, students keep adults honest. And they know best about what they need. So we produced a series of summits around the country where we allowed young people to name the things that are most important to them. And we asked students everywhere we went one question: what do you need in order to thrive? And the overwhelming answer that was provided in every part of our country, in small, rural, isolated communities and major metropolitan spaces, everybody answered overwhelmingly: love. And that's my answer, right? It should be no surprise to anybody who knows me, because that's the answer that Toni Morrison and James Baldwin have offered to so many of our problems. And donating money, volunteering time, demonstrating compassion, taking the time to learn about and honor people's pronouns. The thing that is beneath each of those is love. And so what I really want to invite people to think about is doing more based on wherever you are, really anchored in increasing your competence so you can demonstrate compassion, because all of that will help. Sure, we are a 501c3 organization. We would love people to donate. If you have a house you want to write off, we are happy to be good stewards in that regard. But honestly, the thing that matters most, to go back to a previous point I made about mental health, the data shows that the biggest factor in addressing or shifting mental health trauma is support. It's loving family and friends and community members who are not trying to gaslight you to convince you that you are not beautiful and wonderfully made exactly as you are. And so my hope is that people see and leverage NBJC as a resource, to know that they don't have to do this work of learning about how to use they, them, and their, or adopting new pronouns, or asking young people, or adults for that matter, how they want to be acknowledged, sometimes daily, because we should not make assumptions. And we now have opportunities to move past the binaries. Each of those things are things that we can be helpful in, and everyone demonstrating compassion to hold space for each other is how people can be most helpful to the goal of ending racism and LGBTQIA plus bias, stigma, and discrimination, so that we can literally all be free and otherwise have opportunities to thrive.
Well, David, thank you for joining us on the focus group. We've been speaking with Dr. David Johns. He's Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. Learn more about the NBJC at nbjc.org. Also, on June 15th, be sure to tune in to Can't Cancel Pride. Can't Cancel Pride is iHeartMedia and P&G's Pride Charity Showcase, featuring the most influential voices and the biggest names in the LGBTQ plus community in culture and entertainment. This event has already raised millions of dollars that benefit organizations like the National Black Justice Coalition. Procter & Gamble is a valued client of ours, and we encourage you to learn more about Can't Cancel Pride at can'tcancelpride.com. You'll be able to donate there as well to the NBJC. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy on the road to Pride.
You're listening to The Focus Group with Tim and John. Learn more at focusgroupradio.com. Now back to The Focus Group with Tim and John. Available pretty much everywhere.
Welcome back to the Focus Group. Tim Bennett here with John Nash, and that's one of our segments on the road to Pride, where we're highlighting some nonprofits that you know or some you may not know from along the way. Now, John, you know what I just realized about? Well, here we are in kind of the beginning of June, and the leprechaun hasn't shown up.
Oh, top of the pride to
There
you.
he
Happy
is.
Pride.
Right?
You're right.
I wonder where has he been? He's
He
been
has
busy.
been hiding out because, you know, not to be share this with everybody, but Tim and I, there's a bunch of things we're dealing with that might have made the Pride leprechaun just say, I'll come out a little later. Do you agree, Tim?
I was going to say these. You and I will be delighted when August arrives. Is my guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be an unusual June, July.
Yeah.
Nothing terrible, folks. Just dealing with stuff.
We're we're adulting, I guess isn't that what they call it?
Yeah, we're adulting. Yeah,
Got a lot of-
and we're adulting, as many listeners would know, with aging parents or with friends and ourselves. So yeah,
Yes.
adulting.
So we always have a segment here called the Business Birthday. So without further ado, Mr. Nash.
Everyone does celebrity birthday greetings, but the Focus Group is the only show in the universe that celebrates business birthdays.
This was an odd one. I've never heard of this guy. Clifford Brooks Stevens, born June 7th, 1911. He died at 83 years old in 1995. An American industrial designer of home furnishings, appliances, automobiles, motorcycles, as well as graphic design and styling. And so if you're watching on the video, John had put up a number of things that he's credited for, and the list goes on and on and on of what this guy has done, and certainly has changed the what we know as Americans, particularly in the 20th century. He was born in Wisconsin, developed a company or started a company called Brooks Stevens Incorporated, which was in Wisconsin. He was born in Milwaukee, as I said. He had polio as a child, so he was encouraged by his father to practice drawing because he was confined to bed. And they said they think that motivated his career in design. He'd gone off to Cornell University, studied architecture, and in 1933 he established his own home furnishing and design firm in Milwaukee, 1934 time frame. And he opened up an automotive museum in Mequon, Wisconsin, which had a number of the designs that he had put together. This is funny because for 3 or 4 weeks in a row this has come up. He's the guy who designed the Wienermobile for Oscar Mayer. And he's the one who actually built them in his factory in Wisconsin. Can you believe it?
It's this guy.
This
First, I was gonna
Wienermobile.
ask-
You know, how many times have we talked about the Wienermobile this year?
And
Probably
here's
3
the
or 4.
guy who did it, right?
Here's the guy who did
Yeah.
it. So but I'm just going to list everything that he's done here just in a pretty quick go through, and then you and I can discuss it. So his designs in home kitchen appliances were popular. He was recognized as the originator of the robin's egg blue phase of the 1950s kitchen appliances.
That look. Yeah.
So we all know that blue, right? He was credited with the iconic Skylark laminate design popularized in Formica. So, those like little spicules and those things with Formica.
yeah.
He's the one who was credited with that design and did all that stuff for home goods. He also designed the Miller Brewing logo and convinced the company to switch from brown bottles to clear bottles. He also was the automobile designer for the 1962 Studebaker Gran Turismo, which stayed around until it ended production. He designed Harley-Davidson motorcycles, including the Hydroglide Harley, which was one of the first that had a new suspension fork and a front bucket headlight, which streamlined design. To this day, all Harleys since include models based on his body design. He designed the Jeep Wagoneer in 1963. We all remember the Wagoneer, the Willys Jeep. He made that into more of a family-friendly car, which went on through the years with Jeep, of course, AMC, and Chrysler. He designed the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, which is an American pop culture icon. He designed engines for Briggs & Stratton. He designed the logo for the Milwaukee School of Engineering, which they still use to this day. He designed the Skytop Lounge observation cars for the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul Pacific Railroads. So those trains with those huge dome
You mean
tops.
the bubble
Bubble
like
tops.
observation lounge
Trains,
kind of thing?
yeah.
Okay.
He designed the Excalibur sports car for Studebaker. He designed recreational boats for Outboard Marine and Evinrude, Lark, and Johnson. He also designed concept boats. He also designed leisure watercraft or yachts for cutter boats. He also is credited with designing the front end of the Volkswagen 411, which was a car in the late 60s and 70s. Remember the Karmann Ghia, but then they had the Bug. Remember the Volkswagen
I do
Beetle or
remember
the
that,
Bug?
yeah.
And then there were these little station wagons. They had a different front, but he was the guy who designed all those non-Beetle or Bug cars. And then the one thing he's often credited for, but he says he really shouldn't be, he was credited with the concept of planned obsolescence. So that's the practice of shortening the product life cycle so that it would influence buying patterns for people to buy again. So you had this planned
Thank you,
obsolescence.
Clifford Brooks Stevens, for making all our phones, last
But he said
2 years.
he said he did not invent it, but he popularized the term. So
Okay.
Stevens said he said, I prefer to say I instilled in the buyer the desire to own something a little newer, a little better, a little sooner than necessary. So his view was always to make the consumer want something new rather than create poor products that would need replacing. So they said there was debate over whether this was a controversial business practice or not, but that was his philosophy on it. He died in 1995. The New York Times called him at the time a major force in industrial design, an iconic American classic.
Okay, couple questions for you. You said as a child he was afflicted with polio, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he would be wasn't Mitch McConnell also? Didn't he deal with polio as a young boy? And
I don't
that's why he
know.
was so big on vaccination and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know that. But yeah, it could be. I don't know the thing about
And
Mitch
this
McConnell.
whole notion that his parents actually were, or his dad was, being that he would be in bed a lot of the time as a
Right.
kid. I mean, stimulating his creativity,
Right.
and is just amazing. And look, he becomes like this amazing industrial designer, right?
And it is one of these people that had touched so many things, did so many things, and probably could walk down the street and nobody knew him. Right. I mean, that was one of the things about it. The little product up on the right, if you're watching on the video, you would love that. So that was a little. It was a boat with a helicopter top on it, and it never sold, but they actually do have prototypes, and they do have them on display. It's almost like a little Jetsons car, but the whole point of that was there was this boat, and if you're out fishing and you decide you want a new fishing spot to go to another lake, you would just put on the helicopter and boom, boom, hop to another lake, and so your boat would lift out of the water and you'd fly over to another lake.
It's
which I
a
thought was
very
pretty
Jetsons looking
cool.
thing.
Oh
right?
yeah, it's great, and you should see the real ones look just like it. It's a shame we haven't made these things.
Oh.
Although, don't you think they'd be hitting everybody boom
Yeah.
in the sky?
There'd be air traffic control up the wazoo. I still wanted a
drones.
cocktail in orbit. I thought by our age we'd be able to go up to orbit and have a martini at a space station. It turns out that Mitch McConnell did have polio at the age of 2. Yeah, I remember that fact somehow. No, this guy's fantastic, and I love the background of an industrial designer who has as wide a fingerprint, or footprint is a better word, than he does, from automobiles to graphic design to motorcycles to kitchen. You know what I mean? It's like it's anything he could. Hey, I think I'll make something cool out of that.
I just pulled the things that I thought were most well known or interesting. But the packaging design he did for 3M and all these other companies. I mean, he was busy.
Yeah,
he was busy. I hope he was paid handsomely for his work. It didn't say, but hopefully he was.
Excellent business birthday, Tim. And in all the years you've been doing this, have you ever, as you said at the start, you never came across him before, right?
No, I found him by
hook and crook.
There was another person, I forget who it is now. There was another business birthday I was going to do, more traditional, founded a bank or something. And then I was poking around, and as I said, I've gone to this Canadian site. And they have a little different spin.
Wider variety?
Yeah, or just different. The research is a little different. Before, I used to go to a site out of India, and that site's been shut down. So I don't know why. But, you find some pretty cool people along the way. So
you know what happens with those sites? They're not necessarily shut down. Whoever owns them just stops.
Yeah.
They let the URL go, and they just stop maintaining it, and I get that. Yeah. Excellent business birthday. Hey, thanks for joining us on the Focus Group today. I want to remind you that next week we're going to have Ben Modell,
like the sports.
Sports Modell
sporting goods.
I don't know why I do that, and we've talked to him a number of times. Ben's going to be on to talk about silent films, and it's going to be a fun conversation, so we're hoping that you join us for that. Be sure to check out focusgroupradio.com, and that includes access to our Tuesday podcast called TFG Unbuttoned. And again, thanks to Deep Discount, we gave you some great movies. Just do a quick rewind. You can find them all at deepdiscount.com. So everybody have a great week, and remember to don't text and drive, arrive alive, please. A lot of bad driving this summer. I'm seeing it everywhere. And guess what? Every time I drive by a car that's swerving, there's a phone in someone's hand. It's not hard to make that connection. Anyway.
I always blow the horn and wave my finger. And they still don't look up.
They still don't look up, and they don't care that you tried to flip them the bird. All right, everybody, please stay safe. Have a great week, and we'll see you in the new one.
It's The Focus Group with Tim Bennett and John Nash. Accessible on all platforms. Subscribe, like, and rate us on your platform of choice. Learn more at focusgroupradio.com.
That was a stunning focus group.